ADHD students. So one of the things that we can do then is, if there's going to be a transition between subjects or activities at school, don't just go from reading to math to gym to class or to other classes or to lunch or whatever the student is doing. Every transition like that should be a stopping point where we stop and make a plan with the student and go over the plan beforehand. So what we're going to do is, let's say we're going from math over to the science lab. When the student arrives at the science lab, the teacher stops them and says, all right, we're about to start science. What are the rules in science class? And the student has to repeat what the rules are for that day. Obviously, the teacher has already reviewed the rules for their class. Maybe the teacher can write it down on a little card. And when the student comes in, they said, all right, this is science class. What are the rules? Read those for me. Repeat them back. Second, what are you going to earn in my class for following those rules? What is my reward for you going to be? Usually it's going to be points or tokens, but it can be something else in your class as well. Number 3, explain the penalty. What are you going to lose if you break my rules? And the student has to tell you that. And then finally, you give the student something active to do as they enter your class and go to their desk. Maybe it's go and open their science book and turn to a particular page and start reading or working. Maybe it's to go over to a lab experiment and begin to start to set up their little science lab workstation. Whatever it is, it should involve activity. And now the student enters the situation. The plan is in place. Everybody understands the plan. We've got it up front. The rules are external. The rewards and punishments are known. And now we can start the activity. Teachers are to reward throughout the activity, or sometimes take away points as a penalty. And then we can evaluate with the student how you did at the end of that activity. You can cut your problems down by 50 to 60% or more if you would just be proactive, think ahead, and not start into an activity when you don't have a plan in mind for your ADHD student. They need that plan to be made obvious, physical, and they need to be reminded of the consequences. And then they're likely to show what they know. We've already mentioned this. I won't spend much time on it. We need to make the rules and the instructions physical. Okay, so we need to use notes, cards, signs, posters, lists, anything you have that can put the information on it where the child is to work that goes over the rules for that work period, so that the child has it in their visual field. We've talked about this before, but we also talked about time needs to be physical as well during these assignments. One way of making time physical is obviously to use a little spring-loaded cooking timer like we all have in our kitchens. Or maybe you can use a smartphone that has a built-in digital timer on it so that the student can see time is passing. Here's a 1-foot clock you can get at Amazon that you can set for up to 1 hour, and the red disc begins to disappear, showing you physically how much time has elapsed, how much time you have left before you have to turn in your assignment. Now, as I've said, we will have to periodically use punishment or penalties with ADHD children. All reward programs just aren't going to do it, even though I emphasize the need for rewards in this presentation. There are various things that you can do to encourage children to behave appropriately and to penalize misbehavior. But don't forget what I said earlier, right? You must make sure you have enough rewards and incentives to encourage the appropriate behavior before you try to institute penalties. Because without those rewards, the penalties aren't going to work. Right? Now, you must use your penalty swiftly, within 10 seconds of the beginning of a misbehavior. Don't yell, don't remind, don't repeat yourself, don't threaten. Right? If you have a rule and the child breaks the rule, the penalty occurs right then. The faster you penalize, what we call swift justice, the easier it is for children to learn, and the more effective that penalty will be at training children not to do that again. Also, as I've said, make the discipline, make the corrective statement that you're saying to the child personal. So you go to the child, you touch them, you give your correction, your reprimand, right, to them quietly when they make eye contact, so it's personal. Then it's more likely to succeed. You're obviously going to occasionally need to be taking away points and tokens if you're using a point system in your class, which I encourage you to do. Occasionally, you will have to put the child in what we call timeout, which is a place in a corner of the classroom where they are to go when they misbehave. But for ADHD children, we find that traditional timeout is not very good because it's passive. And ADHD children have trouble simply sitting quietly and doing nothing. So instead of just sitting in a chair facing a corner of the classroom as if they've been timed out, we want you to have work there that the child has to do. Little copies of worksheets from workbooks that are very simple. And all you do is when the child misbehaves, you say, "Give me 3." And the child has to go to the corner, count out 3 worksheets, sit down at that desk, do the simple worksheets. When they're done, they put it on your desk and return to their own desk. So you determine the length of the timeout by how many worksheets you give them. They also determine when the timeout is over by how quickly they get that work done. And then they go back to their class. This involves an active form of punishment in which the child has what we call corrective behavior, things they need to do, work in this case, before they're allowed to return to the classroom. You can, of course, as I've said, threaten to record misbehavior with your smartphone and send it through a text message to their parents or a grandparent or somebody if they're having a little mini temper tantrum in the classroom. Maybe that will help you cut down on these temper outbursts. No child likes to have their tantrum recorded on a movie and shared with someone else. So you can use that kind of public shaming, but I wouldn't use it too often, especially with depressed ADHD children. You can have children write essays as to why I will not do that misbehavior. That only seems to work for older children who understand what that rule is and that that's a penalty. I've encouraged you to have a quiet corner for a chill-out location for children when they become upset where they can go and recover their self-control. It's not really a form of punishment, but just a place to emotionally recover. Finally, you can use traditional timeout where they simply sit in a chair in a corner and face the wall. But it should be in the classroom, not the hallway. Hallway timeouts don't work very well. There's too much traffic, activity, other people to socialize with when they're outside the classroom. So we don't recommend that. If children repeatedly misbehave, then maybe they have to have what we call in-school suspension. They have to go to another classroom or maybe down to the principal's office, and they're going to have to spend the classroom time there doing their work under the supervision of somebody one-on-one so that they're not so disruptive of the typical classroom at that time. But again, we don't recommend that as a standard punishment for ADHD children unless they are misbehaving very, very frequently. If you're going to time a child out, make sure that you do it swiftly. You do it immediately on the misbehavior. They are to spend at least 1 minute for year of their age in the timeout corner. That is, unless you're going to use the do-a-task procedure that I mentioned earlier, where you tell them how many worksheets they have to do before they can return to the class. And again, the location must be visible to the teacher, and the timeout is terminated when the child has either done the work we've asked them to do or the interval has been served. That is, the punishment period has been served without interruption. Now, a lot of what I've just said applies to teenagers in school, but I want to emphasize just a couple of things with teens before we conclude this presentation. Teenagers have a lot more teachers, a lot more responsibilities, multiple classes that they have to get to. There's often a lot of interaction between teenagers as they move about the school, going from one class to another. Over in this country, they have lockers where they store their books, and they have to go to their locker, get their next books and assignments, and get to their next class in about 3 to 5 minutes. So there's a lot of organization required, a lot of time management required, a lot of working memory required of teenagers. This is why we encourage most teenagers to go on an ADHD medication. If they're off of one, go back on it. If they were not on it, they should be considered for medication. We have found that nothing helps teenagers in the midst of all of this organizational challenges except their medication. Nothing is more effective. So encourage most teens to try the medications. Second, we have somebody who holds the teen accountable for their behavior and their work 3 times every day. We call this person the coach or the mentor. It can be a teacher, a social worker, a psychologist, a vice principal, anybody in that school that is willing to spare 15 minutes to work with that teen. It's going to be 5 minutes in the morning when they arrive at school. Go see your mentor. They're going to get your homework together, help organize you for the next few classes, give you one of those daily report cards I showed you earlier so that we can monitor your behavior as you go through your morning classes. And your teachers are going to rate you as to how you're doing. You're also going to write your homework assignments on the back of that card. If not, then we're going to give you an assignment sheet to record your assignments on. All right, now give them a little bit of an encouraging pep talk, a little motivational speech, send them out the door. They're to come back at lunchtime, midday, for a 5-minute checkup. Same thing. Organize them for the afternoon, make sure they have the right books, look at their behavior report card, see how they're doing, make sure they've got their assignments, send them out for the afternoon classes with some motivational pep talk. And then they see you at the end of school before they leave school to get organized to leave school and also to review how they did. We have found that medication with a mentor or coach at school, using a behavior report card with an assignment sheet in which the teen is accountable 3 times a day to somebody at school, to be the most effective things you can do to help ADHD teenagers succeed at school. Other things that you can do simply are make sure there's an extra set of books kept at home, so in case they go home with an assignment but they forgot the right book, they have the extra book there. They can also tape record their assignments at school while they're listening to their lectures. Don't forget, we encourage note-taking during lectures by ADHD students so that they're actively engaged, their hands are moving, they're writing down what they need to remember and not relying on that defective working memory. And here's a device they can use to do that. It's called the Smart Pen by LiveScribe. And when you touch the pen to the paper, it starts recording the lecture through a digital recorder. And then at night, at home, you can not only review your notes, you can also touch that pen to certain parts on that page, and it will go to that part of the lecture for you to review again. So it's a very ingenious device for high school and college students. You can also give these students calendars, such as week-at-a-glance calendars for writing down their assignments, their commitments, their sports teams' commitments, and so on, so that they can stay organized for the week. Over here, people want to know, should they give teens extra time for taking standardized tests at school? We have not found this to be especially beneficial. Everybody benefits from an extra 20 to 30 minutes when they have an exam that they have to take, not just the ADHD students. So it's not something we think is preferentially beneficial. Instead, we have found from research that it's better for them to take the exam in a quiet, distraction-free environment. It's also better for them to self-pace the exam. What do I mean by that? You give them a stopwatch. When they start the exam, they start to watch. They're only going to get the same amount of time interacting with the exam as other students, but they can stop the watch, stand up, stretch, get a drink of water, come back, sit down, and start the stopwatch again. So again, they only get an hour and a half, let's say, or 2 hours of face time with the exam. but they do get to interrupt it periodically to take breaks and to stretch and exercise a bit and then start the exam again. Will this take longer than it does other students? Yes. So it does involve extra time. But it's the strategy of how we're using the extra time that matters. The student is self-pacing the exam, taking breaks when they need to, and that's what makes it work. We're not just going to give them extra time to waste. Obviously, you can give them extra handouts, videos, books on tape, other things that they can use in order to back up what they're learning in school through learning out of school. And again, don't forget the continuous note-taking that I've already recommended, along with the SQ4R system for reading comprehension. We also encourage teens to swap phone numbers and emails with other students so that if they forget an assignment, they can get it immediately through a text message or a cell phone call to one of their backup students who also has the assignment. We ask that teachers give the ADHD teen extra time after school, at least once or twice a week, for help sessions to make sure that you know what they're learning and also to show them give them any extra help for that subject that they might require. We also encourage parents to pay money for students' grades to ADHD students. We call this bucks for bees, bucks referring to the US dollar, where parents tell students that for every paper you bring home with a certain grade on it, you're going to get extra money in your weekly allowance. And better grades get more money than lower grades do. Teenagers love money. And therefore, this becomes an incentive for them to work harder at school so that they can earn more money at home, just like they would if they had a job. And then finally, we want parents and teachers to get together at least every 4 to 6 weeks for a conference to review how their ADHD teen is doing. Don't wait until the end of the grading period, which in my country is the 9-week grading period. That's too late. The student has failed the class by the time we do review. We want frequent reviews so that we can see how the teen is doing and make corrective action for anything that's going wrong so that we have a chance to head off any opportunity of failure. I hope you've seen that there are many, many things that we can do in the school environment to help ADHD children. The school environment is one of the most impairing environments for a child with ADHD. But by going through and selecting from among these more than 80 different strategies that I have given you today, you should be able to design an effective program to help most of the students with ADHD in your classroom. In addition, don't forget the use of medication for ADHD students who have at least moderate or severe ADHD. Medication combined with these behavior management strategies and educational adjustments can be put together to form a very effective treatment package and form the keys to success for children with ADHD in your classroom. Put them all together, things should go very, very well for you. Thank you for attending to this lecture. I hope you found it useful, and I hope that these strategies can help you help your students with ADHD to be happier, more effective, and more successful in your class. Thank you for joining me today.